Hello, my name is Dave Fricks, and I'm a technology evangelist over here at Qlik. Today we're going to discuss data governance with Snowflake around both ingestion and consumption by analysts. Before we dive into the details around governance, let's go ahead and recap a little bit on the different ways that Qlik and Snowflake work together. There are many different ways that Qlik can take advantage of the Snowflake architecture and infrastructure, whether we're dealing with the data source ingestion coming from web or enterprise applications or OLTP systems like SAP, whether Snowflake runs on any number of cloud providers, or how we want to take that data out of Snowflake and get the data to the user in order to make business decisions. So let's dive in a little bit specifically around what we can do with Qlik. Now, with Qlik, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to take the information, we're going to be able to ingest it into Snowflake. We are going to be able to automate the creation of data warehouse and data marts with Qlik Compose. We are then going to be able to catalog all of that output with a governed data catalog. And then we're going to be able to provide that catalog information as well as those marts and warehouses to Qlik or any other analytics tool for consumption. So let's go ahead and discuss what is data governance. So data governance really comes into when we have data and potentially a lot of data. We need to understand what the data is. So when we talk about doing governance, we need to understand what kind of data is it? Who should be able to access it? Is there any sort of sensitive data, personal identifiable information, GDPR compliance? What's the business framework for that information? Are there policies in place we need to take advantage of? What if it's a ton of data? How do I go and find it, and how do I manage it all? What are the provenance of the data from end to end? What are the transformations that occur? And how do we do this across multiple different systems? We have a lot of inputs, we have a lot of outputs. How do we understand where it goes? Data governance, when we're thinking about it in this framework, really starts with what do we need to know about the data before we actually start putting it into Snowflake. And this is where Qlik Replicate brings to the table some very powerful capabilities. So we've partnered with SecuPy and Snowflake in order to put in a whole bunch of masking and PII limiting frameworks into our ingestion technology we call Qlik Replicate. Now, this is done using UDFs, so user-defined functions, that are able to map to the different types of data, apply the correct algorithm on how that data should be managed for GDPR compliance or PII compliance or HIPAA compliance. And as that data then is moved across the system, it is actually encrypted or changed, depending on how you want to look at it, using a key from SecuPy. That can be later unscrambled if the person has the right key to be able to do so. So this process is already in place with Qlik, SecuPy, and Snowflake around the data ingestion component of moving information into Snowflake. So let's go ahead and get into the heart of our governance story with the Qlik Data Catalog. So let's discuss a little bit about what Qlik Data Catalog is bringing to the table. So it really is going to fall into several different buckets. A smart data catalog, which inventories all of the information inside of a Snowflake system or in concert with other systems. It allows you to search, allows you to profile, it captures the metadata, it will understand the lineage and relationship of how the data got to where it is. It allows you to discover connections among data set. That information can also be tagged, for example, as PII, and then it will be obfuscated based on the rule that is applied. Once that information is then cataloged, a user can come in and shop for data. So based on who they are and what they have access to, again, governance, they're going to be able to see the data that they have access to, see the columns that they have access to, shop through the data, choose what they want, add it to a cart, and be able then to launch that directly into Qlik or other BI tools of their choices. And there's even more additional capability in there to prepare data, to take information and combine it together and pre-build it for the purposes of doing analytics. Diving down specifically into data governance tasks in an Agile cataloging scenario, what exactly are we looking at? So the first thing we need to do is be able to discover the data. We need to inventory it. We need to describe it with metadata, right? How did it come from? How did it get here? What does it mean? So we then define that information. Is it simple? Is it complex? Apply policies. Who can see it? Who can use it? What things need to be obfuscated? applying that information for output. How do I go forth and use this information? And also bringing in collaboration, being able to not only tag things with metadata and use case and business process, but being able to say, okay, let people in, let everybody collaborate on these catalogs and put in their own commentary, put in their own notes to help grow and add validity to the information, because it's going to be scored based on quality, it's going to be scored based on popularity, and so these are sort of the things that we're talking about with data governance. Let's take a look now at Data Catalog in action. So this is the first screen that we get when we log in, which is the actual presentation of the catalog. You'll notice that there are many other buttons. I can look at operational metrics, I can set up my sources, I can go and discover the information and run queries against it, I can prepare it for other combinations of data and actually do some ETL work. Down here is where I can control security. This is where I can set up to publish to other systems. But let's go ahead and just kind of walk through this process we talked about with data governance. So first thing I'm going to come in and do is search through my catalog, because that's a shopping cart style approach. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Snowflake and just type that in, and now it'll bring back all the data that's stored in here with information about Snowflake. So maybe I want to come in and look at some of my customer information. So I will go dive into my customer, and I get a little snapshot of the information about my customer. I can come in and I can take a look at the lineage, and I can see this information was moved from Replicate into Compose into Snowflake with some transformations, and actually published out to an aggregate entity that was part of this prepare and publish process. So I can see that there's some depth here of what's been going on with my information. But as we talked about, one of the interesting things about this is we've scored this. Is this considered operational quality data or operational data? Is it what its quality? So there is some holes in it. And how popular is it? How many people are using this type of data? So these are sort of the key KPIs that we score in catalog. But this is something that's interesting to me. I can also notice that I've got some tags down here, and we'll come back to that. I will go ahead and add this to cart. I will come over and I will take action, and now I'll see I can do something with this data. I can publish it to Qlik, I can publish it to Tableau, I can publish it to Power BI, or I can create it as a new data set to merge with something else. So that's, again, this is how we go from governance to being able to consume the information as an analytical user. Expanding just a little bit on what we've captured here inside of the data, let's go ahead and move down from the publish and take a look at what else we're capturing. And we can see that we've got various properties associated with this. I've actually can see that some of this information has been tagged as having PII, some metadata values around that. So if the value PII is true, that will be masked. Now I'm logged in currently as an administrator, so that's going to be a little bit different of what I can see. But if I come down here, I can also see the other associated entities with this. These are the other fields that are part of the process of the creation of this content. So I'm seeing not only lineage, I'm also seeing now correlation with all the other data entities that are associated with this data set. Now, what's interesting about this, if I scroll down a little bit under my properties, I can actually see that I have the ability now to request access to see a certain field. So this is where we kind of do start getting into the concept of having, some interactivity around the governance information of this system. So, what can I do with it now that this information has been tagged here? Well, maybe we'll complete the process of adding it to the cart. I go ahead and add to cart. I say take action. I say publish to Qlik. And I can either now publish it to an existing app, I can create a new app, and it's very simple. I just go ahead and hit OK, and now it will go off and publish this information. I can start the process of doing analytics. It's now launching me into Qlik, where I'll go ahead and start using our Insight Advisor to go find interesting information about the data. So we'll generate some insights. I want to look at information based on email, and it will go profile that. And I want to look at information around emails that are active. And anyway, but I've started the process of picking some data and immediately clicking a button, being able to go and analyze it. So one of the other components of data governance is not just obfuscation of data and personal information, which we've seen, the ability to limit who can see what and who can interact with what information and security and all that information. It's also understanding the data itself. So if we come over and we take a look, for example, at some of these recent loads, and this is a case where we've taken the data in and then we've pushed it out for consumption, we can see that in a lot of cases the data is in really good shape, but in other cases it's not. We're getting small amounts of information that are being dropped. So there's bad data in here. So that's part of understanding the process too, is when we look through this information, is the data itself good? And so, because all of our data may not have come in through the replicate process, but when we catalog it, we can take a look at it. And as we scan through the data, we say, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, based on the way that those sources were identified, the constructs. Well, maybe it's a string where it should be a date, or it's a, vice versa type scenario. So we do profile and score the data, and that's where these numbers come from that you see in here, that give you a quality representation. So there's data quality along as part of the governance story here in Qlik Data Catalog. So to this point, what we've now talked about is ingestion of the data, how to govern it, how to mask it, how to control it, ingesting the data into Snowflake, partnering up with Secupy. We've gone through the process of cataloging the information. How do we mask and deal with personal identifiable information? How do we allow users to search through data? How do we know that the users can be controlled to see what they can see and interact with certain data? We've seen how that information can be searched and cataloged and published into analytics tools. And so now we're going to get into the final home stretch, which is, data governance with Qlik Sense. So how does the data is actually consumed and governed by the end user? Thinking about self-service and governed self-service analytics is a really interesting conversation, because what we've seen is the rise of the data lake. And the data lake was this construct of, we'll just dump the data in a giant pile and the users will figure it out. And that actually hasn't worked. It's been a pretty big disappointment. So I know Snowflake has done a ton of work to reinvent the concept of the data lake with the data cloud. And we are part of that conversation when it comes to governing self-service. You can't just have a BI user show up with a SQL tool and you just say, good luck, hope it works for you. So in the situations, again, where we let in this information with catalog, if catalog is not part of the conversation, we're just talking about governance from a Qlik Sense point of view. In of itself, Qlik Sense does a lot of work around governing control and access to the users. And again, the point is to deliver secured, logical information that is well organized into that user base. So what does that look like? It means you're going to be able to monitor who has what and who's doing what, who's using which things, controlling information with section access, which is Qlik's method of securing access to rows and columns of data inside of a Qlik Sense application. Securing the data at source, creating master items and master calculations, and other best practices. So when we take a look at what we're specifically speaking about here in this situation, is controlling those user consumption aspects of Qlik Sense through streams, apps, and sheets, applying security rules to make sure that only the right people see the right information, managing the groups and roles of which people can do administration, which people have the ability to create new content, and then applying what we call section access, which is a hierarchical, cascading, associative engine-based security system. It's much more sophisticated than what you would see with just a pure SQL tool, because Qlik is not a SQL tool. It's an associative correlation engine. So all of these things together, all of these constructs around governance of monitoring and security, reusable calculations and metadata, are key to the Qlik Sense governance story, which is an extension of the catalog governance story, which is an extension of the replicate governance story. I'm going to go ahead and let my friend Dalton walk you through some of how the section access controls work inside of Qlik.
When I'm in Qlik Sense as an administrator, I have the ability to create work. I've got a whole bunch of applications here I'm working on, population health applications, etc. I also have access to an everyone stream. And there's an application out here called Section Access. I'm going to go ahead and open that application. You'll see this is really robust here. I've got my KPI showing me, hey, I've got access to 20 encounters, 20 surveys. I've got these 5 supervisor IDs, which is what I said was there. I can see the supervisors, the survey ID, the survey score. I can't see the PII here. And obviously, this is kind of a weak example in terms of what PII would be, but it's just to demonstrate. I could even, based on that section access, although I could build apps, I may need to lock even administrators out of seeing PII or PHI. And so that's one of the things I could do. Also, as a administrator of the entire system, I get to have access to all of the apps. I get to have access to all of the tasks, all of the streams, all of the users, security. I can configure everything. That's what I do as an overall administrator. One of the things that we'll see besides just functionality for users, though, is maybe I need role administrators. So I'm going to start with 6 first. 6, security-wise, may need to be an administrator, but just for his team. He does not have access to everything. He wouldn't get access to every app, only the apps maybe that are for the team that he runs. Maybe he only needs to see the data connections for those things in his department. Maybe he only needs to see certain objects and certain tasks. And so that's one of the things that is nice, is it can provide that role-based security even for administration functions. If 6 were to come into the hub instead, he's also a user. He is allowed to build work. If he were to come into applications that were available, he'd be allowed to do things. Maybe he can edit apps. If he were to come into this application that's out here for everyone, as we started, he has access to supervisors 3, 4, 5, and that's it. He is not seeing the data for supervisors 1 and 2 at all, for whatever that reason may be, and he's allowed to see all that PII. So we can lock him down as we need to. I'm going to log out as 6, and instead I'm going to come in as Penny. I want to show you some more role administration here. So you'll notice that Penny here does not have the ability to do any work. She can't create new applications. So she's not building stuff from data from cocktail napkins or Excel sheets. She is allowed to edit applications. And so she could work in this application. If she decides she sees something that she wants to change, she could come in, she could duplicate this sheet, and now she's created her own versions. If she liked one of these things that she does, she could turn around and try to publish that back out there for everyone. But again, Penny was not allowed to create brand new applications. She's working from a very governed structure that lets her have access to only what she's supposed to have access to.
Thanks, Dalton. To go ahead and conclude our governance story for Qlik, we're going to talk a little bit about some of our governance tooling that we have built in. So we have what's called the operations monitor, and this gives the users and administrators the ability to understand who's using the system, are we having any performance issues we need to be concerned about, and gives us that monitoring into how the Qlik system is performing. We also have what's called the license monitor, and this gives us similar metrics around users and how they're using the system, what apps are being used by users, what components of what apps. So these governance and monitoring tools give us great insight into how effectively our Qlik environment is being used and being governed. Finally, we have what's called the Snowflake usage dashboard. Now, this is a free download that allows Snowflake users to go and monitor their Snowflake spend and query usage information. We can see we've got queries by user, we've got costs associated with that, overall billing dollars, cost information, query information, and that breaks down into many different areas, including being able to understand where people are logging in from, down to the individual query level. And when is the system being most heavily used? Who's using the most system? Down to the individual query detail. So thank you very much. I hope this was a good tour around the governance story for Qlik, all the way from ingestion with Qlik Replicate and Secupy to all of the governance with our data catalog into the governance with the analytics with Qlik Sense. Thank you so much.